Monday, March 18, 2019. We're here at Upper Dublin High School for a special meeting of the Policy Committee. We did this last year, and this is a joint meeting between some members of the SGA and the school board, specifically the Policy Committee. For the agenda today, we had submitted 3 different policies to the SGA for review to get their feedback and input on those. So it looks like that we have 3 students here today. I'm Sarah Johnson-Rothman. I'm the chair of the Policy Committee. We have a number of other school board members here, administrators, our superintendent, and our solicitor, of course. So the way that we typically run meetings is we look at a policy. There's changes that are suggested by our solicitor's office. A lot of those changes are just updates. Some of these policies haven't been reviewed in 15 plus years. And so we're updating things based on recommendations of our attorneys. And then we have discussions too about some of the actual substantive changes, or even if they're not changes, if this is really reflective of where we see or we want the district to go. After our policy committee meeting, if we agree, we can send a policy to the board in a full legislative meeting for voting. So in order to change a policy in Upper Dublin, it needs to have 2 consecutive approvals by the school board in legislative meetings. So it takes at least 2 months typically for a policy to be changed. A lot of times, it takes a lot more time than that. And today, one of the policies that we have on the agenda is the homework policy, and that's a policy that's going to take quite a bit of time. So we very preliminarily started discussions at a policy committee meeting last week about what that policy looks like right now and where we want to see it to go. We're hoping to get your input on these policies, and then we can take that into consideration, and we're going to have a lot more discussion. So we don't see, for instance, any of these policies, especially homework, probably going to be making changes in the next month or 2. Okay? Thank you for having us. Thank you for coming. So
if you would introduce just let me know.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, if you would introduce yourself, that'd be wonderful.
I am Gwen. I'm spirit chair of the SGA.
I'm Eden Astorino. I'm senior. I'm the president of SGA.
I am the policies and procedures chair of SGA.
And my name is Kobe Garcia, the faculty advisor for SGA.
Thank you. And we had a really nice time last time. I know Mr. D'Arcy was here last time with the students, and we talked about some of our other policies. And so it's great to really get input of people this really affects on a daily basis. And I think taking your input into consideration is something that we really value on board. So if we want to start, we have on the agenda, I think about how much time this takes. I know we want to get into the homework policy, so I'm thinking we can try and talk about independent study first. We had hoped to have Mr. Greiner here, our athletic director, to talk about student athletics. However, of course, our high school girls basketball team is playing in the semifinals tonight. So Mr. Greiner wasn't able to attend. But if we want to first talk about independent study, and then depending upon the time, maybe move into homework, if that works. Okay. So that's what we'll do. So first, on the agenda, we have a policy for independent study. We also have, it says AR 118, which is an administrative regulation. So the policies are the ones that we set by, they're set collectively by the board with a lot of input from our admin. And then we usually have an administrative regulation attached to most of our policies that really gets into the details about what our staff needs to know about how to implement those policies. So first, we usually take a look at actually the policy. So we can pull up policy 118. And the way we have these policies, typically in the red, and they're just struck through for you in the paper, that is the current policy. And so you can see the changes that are being suggested. So does anyone on the board, any of our students have any questions or talk about policy 118?
I just want to clarify the crossed out means we want to get rid of that part and underline this part you're replacing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Some of the crossed out part actually just gets moved into AR. So
Gone.
it's gone.
Okay.
Relooking. Some of it's gone.
Yeah, so as you see, it says when this was last adopted, this policy was adopted in 2002. And so a lot of it is something we're just trying to change. And some of the way we are writing our policy book is different than we did 17 years ago. And so we have shorter essential policies now, and then those are, like I said, the procedures, the regulations are really expounded in the attached AR.
I have no comments on the policy.
I have only one comment. I want to just be clear that it used to be the case in the old version that it said, for a properly qualified student, meaning not everyone is eligible to do this. And there's nothing similar in the new version. So the intent that this is really open for everybody, and that could be in the AR, but
It says approved high school students.
So someone has to be
approved, where does it say approved?
in the, yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Each course.
Yeah, I missed that. So, yeah, there is a hint toward that, says approved, but then there's nothing that even says, and the AR shall define what that approval process is. But we could.
Have this big, we should have the line that the superintendent shall promulgate regulations.
I wouldn't want to get the word promulgated.
I know.
We'll be
You can.
promulgating an administrative regulation, absolutely.
Okay.
For those of you that were not at the last policy meeting, we decided that that is going to be our order.
Right, there's, yeah, so all of our policies, I'd say we direct the superintendent to make up essentially, and there's a ton of different words that have been used over the years in our policies, so we've decided to use the word promulgate and essentially like do a find and replace in all of our policies. So.
I have a question. I guess I should know this, being that you guys been going to school here for the past 4 years, but our independent studies, is that like the student initiates that they would like to do an independent, like what's an example of an independent study that's happened at FO? Is it like a community study or?
It's usually, and it's an interesting question about which students are going to be granted permission. It's usually done through a student's gifted individualized education plan.
Okay.
And if a student has a certain area of giftedness that might involve an area of research that is different or
Got it.
deeper than what we typically do,
Okay.
then we would set her up with something.
Has it also been used if kids exhaust the curriculum in a certain area?
Or want to take additional AP courses.
courses,
yeah. Okay.
So I don't have any issue with policy. If you have any other questions, normally what we do is we look at the policy first, and then we also look to the AR,
Okay.
because the AR obviously goes into explaining this. Yeah. So in this case, you see the guidelines talks about, you know, as what Mark was saying, he said, oh, who are these students? Well, they have to complete the 10th grade according to our policy. So it gives us a little bit more detail about
Okay.
who this applies to and what it really means. And this is completely new, so we don't have, that's why there's nothing marked out on this one. This is a completely new administrative regulation, so.
So why 10th grade?
Yeah, is there a reason?
I had the exact same question.
Okay.
Well, we used to 10th grade where we started letting students take AP, and just the other year we started letting 10th graders take electives, so I don't know whether that was an age, because like a couple years ago when I taught them, that was one of the first years that they had the 10th graders to start to take electives, so I don't know if it's a certain mandatory classes, but I'm not sure. There's a couple other guidelines where you get 10th grade, it seems like harder.
Sorry to interrupt. Can we get everybody to just speak up a little bit?
Thank you.
In my experience in other districts, 10th grade has been sort of a marker because it allows 9th and 10th grade to look at the academic history of the student and to make sure that they're on track to graduate after what should be their senior year with a number of credits and whatnot. But I don't know that it has to remain solely. You have to, complete 10th grade.
Does anyone
There were,
ever asked to do one in 9th grade?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I want to say yes, but I can look into that and get back to it.
We are the committee, yeah. With the exception of Dr. Levinowitz, who's again not here because he's the basketball game, so, yes.
I'm thinking of a particular student who I'm not going to name, who I think did one in that grade. I can give you that name later. Yeah.
Well, I know the AR states 10th grade, but if we're going to state it in the AR, I think it also needs to be stated in the policy. Because in policy, we just simply say per student, we don't specify the grade either. So,
Well, I think we're suggesting a policy should say that
Yeah.
An administrative regulation promulgators
Defines that,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
And then, so I guess that's the thing, do we need to have 10th graders for cutoff, or can we make it?
And this is actually completed 10th grade, which seems.
Yeah,
which
that's
is going
it,
on.
that's just
Right.
those juniors and seniors, so
Yeah,
instead of that,
but I'm not sure grade or age requirement is appropriate at all, I think.
or what are the standards that we would use?
Well, the other thought is, are we limited to the high school with this document?
So that might be the thing, is do we want to, I mean, have we done independent study in younger grades?
No, we haven't, but I think we
Okay.
probably should.
Okay.
I think there are great opportunities starting in the middle level
Okay.
for kids that, for example, have an extreme passion in earth, space science, for example, or any type of science, and they can, look and say, wow, I already know this content. I'm not looking for acceleration. We could set them up to do an independent study. And that's just one example.
Now, in the high school, you get credit for an independent study. There really isn't the concept of credit.
At the middle level.
Yeah, so,
And it's listed in the program studies as well.
right, yeah, so I'm not sure what it would mean exactly to have an independent study. What the formal definition of independent study would be in middle school.
In other places that I've been, we actually had more students, well, I shouldn't say more students, probably as many students at the middle school doing it. That would just replace, the course that science or
Okay.
whatever. And we would develop a parent-student school district compact that outlined the expectations for students engaged in that.
I mean, it would seem that with a lot of the stuff that they're doing with personalized learning at middle school anyway, that this would seem to be able to be brought down if necessary.
I don't think the 10th grade part is necessary, though. I think that, you don't need to limit it based off that. I see why you have like AP courses and stuff, but, yeah, I just think that 9th grade is,
So I think that's what we're talking about. So instead of having it a 10th grade, completed 10th grade cutoff, we need to have some other parameters of who are the students that would be approved for such a program because they have some type of interest or they've completed. I mean, the only thing I worry about is Keystone's biology in 9th grade. They would have to be able to complete that. PSSA's science, do we have that in 8th grade?
8th grade.
Okay. So,
I can pull parameters I used in previous districts and bring that to the next committee meeting, and we can look at those. We did not allow it for Keystone courses, so Algebra 1, Biology, and English 9 and 10, because 10th grade is when we get the Keystone correct, right? And so 9th and 10th we held that they were not eligible for independent studies, but other courses.
Well, and so as it's written in the past, not as it's written here, it can't really be a course that we offer anyway, unless we want to visit that in new language, but in the existing.
Language,
it has to be
right. It's something that
not offered through a course.
Right, either
Which
takes
I
it
also-
deeper or.
Yeah. Which I also think, if somebody can do it better through an independent study or can do other things and do that through an independent study, I'm not sure why it has to be different from a course.
Well, you're right, and I think there are some cases that we can look at. Sometimes, and I don't know without talking to Chris Mitchner how many times this happens, but sometimes independent studies have been used for schedule resolution purposes. The kid can't get into the AP language and, the honors jazz band, because they're offered at the same time. So we look at how do we offer one or both of those as independent studies to alleviate a schedule issue.
So we're changing the reg.
yeah, we're going to change the reg. We want to So we'll need to get parameters. I think Dr. Yanni said he would look and see other parameters, and if you have other suggestions for what parameters could apply for students, so it's not just a grade level.
I added a shared note in the draft.
Great.
Yeah.
About that, so.
So as it's written, like pretty much everything in here is high school focused. And I'm
Yeah.
envisioning the next draft will have sort of a high school and middle school.
Right.
Section.
If we're gonna allow it middle school, we need to have that.
And presumably not elementary.
I would recommend not for elementary, even at the middle level. When we talk about the parameters, there's a certain type of student that can handle, just because of the developmental process. Kids have to be self-starters. They have to have metacognition about their work. So I would not see this at elementary.
Okay. I have one other question, which is that no student will be granted more than one independent study per school year, unless required by an IEP, GIP, or by report. And then down bullet number 5 says it'll be either one semester or one school year in duration.
Yeah.
So if it's one semester, why wouldn't we, if we allow a school year long independent study, why wouldn't we allow true one semester independent study? I mean, maybe only one concurrent independent
Right.
study.
One at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's we can be flexible with that language as well.
Yeah.
Okay. That's number 5.
I have a small nitpick one, because anything we use acronyms like GPA, we should define it before we cite it. The other one is more of an administrative question. So this is, I think, the first AR policy that we referenced, the Chief Academic Officer. And so since that's a new position and title, I guess the question is, how does that work with the policies when previous ones we simply say curriculum director or whatever? Do we need to?
So I think just like we keep building principal pretty agnostic, I think instead of saying chief academic officer, it should say the building principal and the administrator in charge of curriculum. Because then that way, if when titles change or personnel changes, we don't have to go back.
Okay, good.
I have one more. Can an independent study satisfy a prerequisite?
I've never been in a district that allowed that to occur. I think it's open for discussion, but there would have to be really clearly articulated benchmarks along the way to make sure that the student, let's say they wanted to take calculus BC, and so they couldn't get calculus AB in their schedule, so they do it as an independent study. There have to be clear metrics that show strong, solid mastery of the content to be able to go into that next course.
Yeah, I mean, a version that's not so tied to like an AP test or something. AP computer science principles.
Mm-hmm.
If they do an independent study before that, that's roughly equivalent to the computer science, introductory computer science class, I think we named it. Where they become a programmer. It seems to me it would meet the need, even if it's not specifically that course.
I think question we get into there is it being taken as an independent study, or is it being done purely for acceleration purposes? And when it's done for acceleration purposes, typically don't award a credit. Get a transcript from another location. We demonstrate some means of proficiency through taking midterm and final. I don't know if that gets convoluted through an independent study. It's a great question.
Yeah.
I think we should probably have something in the policy and in the admin reg that clearly delineates this. This is not, because we have other processes in place for acceleration.
There's a tutoring component that you could go through. You can take it at another institution over the summer online, and I don't know if that's really independent.
No, independent study would be, in my experience, it's always been kids that have had an extreme interest in something. They were a good academic standard. It was something that wasn't offered or wasn't offered to the depth of what they could delve into it, and that's what the independent study would be.
Right, but I'm thinking, so to go back to my previous example, if somebody had say, ninth grader had a passion for robotics and was developing a robot on their own with guidance from one of our staff, and, you know, they programmed the robot and all that, and couldn't they move on to take AP Computer Science Principles, not having taken the introductory? Like, it's sort of acceleration, I agree, but it's also, I mean, it was a legitimate independent study. It wasn't just for the purpose of acceleration. Yeah. I don't think we can answer this necessarily right now, but I think that, you know, there's a fuzzy one. It's going to require some judgment. I don't think we're going to come up with the best.
So I think from what Steve said, you want to add a line in the policy about that this is not for like acceleration purposes.
Put that in the policy.
You want that in the policy and the AR? Okay. Yes. Yes. All right. So we can add that. I think that we could probably do the policy as a first reading. And then the AR is going to obviously need to come back. It might have to come back a couple of times. But we could at least get the policy in the queue.
I think it probably makes sense if we want to have maybe Donna Ward at the next.
I just texted her.
Okay, have Donna Ward and maybe a middle school counselor as well.
Yeah.
Can you ask, Michelle, can you ask one of the middle school
Yep.
counselors to come? And then that way their voices are represented at the table for things that we might be
Or thinking about,
overlooking.
yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so that makes sense. We'll do this for first reading, the next legislative meeting, and then we will bring the administrative budget regulation back with answers to a whole bunch of notes and have Donna and someone from the middle school. Good?
So the only changes that we're making from the draft that's in here is we are basically adding the delegation of responsibility paragraph for implementing independent study, which sets forth the application process and defines the approval criteria for students to apply for independent study.
Yeah, and that, and then
And the acceleration
yeah,
language.
exactly.
Extending learning. I can add that as one of the purposes and goals.
That's what I was thinking.
Extending the learning experience of the classroom without providing for an objective other than simple acceleration.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have any other comments on this, on 118?
That sounds good.
So we can go into homework then. That sounds. So our homework policy is policy 130. It's also crafted back in 2002. Nothing has changed since 2002.
We're just
Thanks when you guys were born. I know.
Never was born.
Yeah. Like the iPhone and Chromebook, like all this building, whatever.
This is Russell. Can I say just a few things about homework? So one of the things that we've started talking about as an administrative team is the idea of homework. And in 2019 and looking forward, what role does homework really play in education? What role does it currently play? What role should it play? How do we get to, or how do we get from where we are to what it should be? And then on top of all of that, looking at how homework is or is not part of students' grades, right? Because we don't want students' grades to be inflated by homework or deflated by homework. So we've had the conversation as central office administrators, started talking about it this morning with the high school, spoke with the elementary principals previously and the middle school principals previously, and then we want to get your input, and then we're also going to do a focus group with some middle school students to talk about their experience as well. I just wanted to give some context around.
Yeah, I wrote an essay and I want to just go about why homework should be banned, and I really think that, I mean, I still don't think homework should be banned. I didn't think that people would actually talk about it today. Cool.
Did you get an A?
No, actually.
That's great. So, yeah, so do you have, I mean, board, do we have students who have any input on this one?
Well, I think what we had mentioned last time in policy is one, it definitely needs to be revisited to perhaps an AR promulgated so that we can delineate by the appropriate levels accordingly. So we can start looking more specific at what our expectations in regards to our policy and philosophy of homework at the middle school, high school, middle school, and elementary levels, and make those so there are some guidance for administrators and teachers at work.
I actually think, despite being last adopted in 2002, this policy is actually pretty good with the exception of the very first bullet, which may seem very big. Everything else in the whole thing, I think is actually pretty good. The other thing that's not there is these regulations we reviewed annually and revised as needed at the end, where annually is apparently every 17 years.
Mr. Schroeder, if you're still on the board in 17 years, it'll come back around.
No, I only get elected every 4 years. So.
One of the things that I think we need the student, well, I know we need the student voice on is, you know, thinking about your own experiences at the high school for specifics. What effect has homework had on you? Do you get a lot of homework? Do you not get a lot of homework? Is it useful? Is it graded? What if you could kind of fill us in on those?
I'll speak first, but I would say, so I have been a student who's taken like AP honors courses all year, but never like all AP or all honors. I've also always had like a significant amount of homework every night. I would say there are some nights where that homework is like 80% busy work, and those are my least favorite homework nights because I felt like I was doing redundant worksheets on concepts I'd already mastered. And then there were other nights where I was studying for a test where it was, like I'll give you an example, AP psychology. I felt like those nights of studying were really worth my time because I was like learning about these high-level concepts that I was interested in could affect my life. So I think that I agree with this assignment should develop student responsibility, good study habits, and organizational skills. I think that our homework right now does do that because it shows like accountability and things like that for completing it on time. I think that maybe something included in here could be about like, I don't know how to phrase it, but maybe like higher level of thinking or like application of the things we learn in school, because I think majority of homework, I don't know if you guys agree, but for me at least, is just like regurgitating information. And that gets depressing because in the real world, there's a lot of the information that you could be learning in like different, more applicable ways than we do through homework. I'm not sure how.
I think that's an important point. And I think to Mr. Sorota's point about number one seeming like an outdated practice, you know, I think back to when I was in elementary school and high school in a traditional math class where you would get a number of problems to do. Sometimes, you know, like do 2 to 60 even. And if I didn't know how to do the first 5, I didn't know how to do the rest of them.
Right.
Or I would practice something incorrectly. So then I was having to undo, when I would be back in class, undo what I practiced at home. So I think it's not just practice and reinforcement, it's more of the application of it. Mm-hmm. Taking this, because you should be practicing and it should be getting reinforced through instruction in the classroom, whether it's personalized learning or it's, you know, collaborative structures or direct lecture, but it should be the application. Now I have this new knowledge. How do I apply it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Some teachers are really good at responding to their emails. So like if you ever have a question, usually they can help you with that, and then the reviewing actually really helps. And sometimes like I'll do better in a test if I have review like throughout the week. If a teacher just says you have a test on Friday, no homework all week, but he just keeps teaching and teaching more, and sometimes you do worse in tests.
I mean, there's been multiple times where I've been giving like homework assignments that I would be doing for like the same kind of assignments I would be doing for the past like 3 days, and then all of a sudden I'm hit with this like worksheet that I don't really know how to do because we didn't really go over this or we didn't really learn this. It's just like a new concept they think that we should be able to do right away. But I don't really understand how we can do the same thing for the past like 3 nights and then be hit with something interesting. Because that's been like almost all of my homework assignments last year when I was taking mostly honors. I don't know if that's just like an honors thing or not, but now that I'm taking like AP classes, it's more of like taking what I've learned and then applying it. And now I can actually like do my homework and understand what's going on.
I know this, you can't really like word this in the policy, but the less homework teachers give that is available, like answer keys online, the better, because like you can Google any math problem ever and answer keys will come up, and teachers oftentimes post answer keys to check your homework, and I promise majority of students copy down the answer key instead of actually doing it. So I think that that's also just like straying away from like old-fashioned worksheets and homeworks that you can just copy online, and more like innovative, cool homework that you don't. I don't know how to example.
Do you think that would be different if homework were not ever part of the grade?
What do you mean? Like students would be?
It didn't count toward your
right, because
toward
students
your
like
grade.
right.
Then you're just hurting yourself by not.
Right.
I think
Yes.
students might be less inclined to do it without grades, which is kind of a tough thing. You assign projects,
Yeah.
and do it, how many points is it worth?
Yeah.
It's one of the first questions they were asked if you just ask them to do something in class. If you post something with a point value, they go and do it. But I think that sometimes points, however you want to do it, or what is the incentive for the student.
Is that because they're, I know you can't answer this for everybody, but do you think that may be because they're trying to balance way too much work and seeing what's worth my investment of time, and if there were less of it, that incentive would go away?
I think
Or disincentive?
I think that could be part of it, or just if they have other work, if they're not going to get a grade for this, then they're just going to push that off to the side and do the stuff that they're going to get the points for. Or there are other things that are graded. So if something has a 50-point value and something has a 10-point value or no value, they're going to work on that 50-point project. If I have time, I'll do the 10-point or 0-point project, but only if I have time. And some kids, as they take more honors and AP classes, their homework load increases. So if you're just trying to get them to maybe to learn or do something with the concept you've taught them and see if they can apply it, well, they're not getting anything for it. Not for every student, they may be less inclined to do it.
Yeah. I also used to think that like if homework wasn't graded, I definitely probably wouldn't be inclined to do it because no one's holding me accountable for it. But this year I'm in the environmental project-based learning class, and most of our homework we do because we rely on each other to know information, or just because we genuinely need to know things or research things or come up with ideas. And I always want to do that homework, even if it's not counted towards my grade. So I think there is something to be said for just like having a general passion for a subject and not getting graded on that homework and doing it to like for the purpose of learning and enjoyment is like more meaningful than doing it for a grade, and might make students, not all students, but like some students inclined to do it.
I think that's an important point. When students understand the purpose of homework, I think that's when it becomes relevant. If I'm just going to give you a worksheet and say, complete this worksheet, and tomorrow we're going to come in and see if you did it, but we're not going to discuss it, or there's not going to be any type of instruction or activity predicated on that, then you're going to be less inclined to do it. Where if you're truly doing something because you need to prepare for the next day, because it's now authentic, and it's something that if you don't prepare for, you're not going to be successful with your peers, I think that's where homework becomes really, really meaningful.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Maybe we want to incorporate that in the first bullet, in how you rewrite it. So it's not just reinforcement or practicing lessons, but it could be preparation, even the concept of flipped classrooms, or research that you have to do to prepare for something that's going to be in class the next day.
Yeah, flipped classrooms was the thing that everybody came to mind when I read that. Completely flies in the face of that idea.
Have you had flipped classrooms? What's a flipped classroom?
You turn it upside down.
You read something or watch a video or whatever at home, and then you come in class and you do the
You
problems.
basically do the learning at
with-
home,
yeah.
do the reinforcement
Right.
in class with support from the
Yes, I've had like homework assignments like that.
Puzzles.
Yeah, like watch video at home and then in class we talk about it.
Right.
Take a crack at what, instead of having the bullets, I think the bullets are sort of repetitive of what precedes it. So I was going to suggest you just reframe the paragraph too. The board recognizes that homework is an integral part of the educational process that purposefully reinforces, extends and enriches classroom instruction while providing great appropriate opportunities for parent-guardian interaction. Homework assignments should complement classroom instruction and not be unnecessarily redundant of it. And the assignment should develop. And they get rid of the paragraphs, which they sort of try to they sort of overlap on the narrative paragraph. I had to think about that, so I just, that's the direction you want to go.
I think that's my intent. What I would suggest is under delegation of responsibility, get rid of that entire part as well, and just say that the superintendent or designee shall promulgate administrative regulation. And from there, a lot of the specifics that were even mentioned here are actually filled in.
Right, so I would rewrite delegation of responsibility to simply say the superintendent or designee shall promulgate regulations for homework, which are supported for each level as to fulfill the purpose set forth above. Purposes set forth above. In fact, we should.
And there's some important stuff that should remain, like, because it's homework, develop regulations shall be shared with parents/guardians. Should be in here somewhere still.
I did include that. I said that while providing great appropriate opportunities for parent-guardian interaction. This is going to be
Right, but the rules.
That will be
Keep
in
it,
the
yeah,
AR though.
keep-
I think, to say that, I think to say in policy that the rules shall be shared. And I
Or
know they
tell
will,
parents.
they'll be in the.
sure,
guide.
sure,
Right, they'll be in the
sure,
student guide, they'll be in
sure.
school achieving.
Yeah,
But
but
we
still,
wanna make sure that
it
they're-
should be in policy.
Yeah, in our policy it says we're going to.
Okay. Which also shall fulfill the above purposes, and which shall also.
And we know with their eagle eyes that if Mr. Sirota or Dr. Kim notice that we don't share them, they'll bring it to our attention.
And the AR, of course, you say they'll be reviewed every 17
They will
years.
be.
Yes, every 17 years.
Yeah.
And
So did you just eliminate the guideline paragraphs?
Because that will all be in
That's
the
all.
AR. Yeah.
Shared with parents, reviewed annually,
Well, that I don't think we need. Reviewed annually, revised as needed.
you don't want that in the policy.
Do we want that in policy? Are we going to do that?
I would like.
Oh, periodically, yeah, periodically, yeah, okay. As long as it's not annually, that's, we will fail immediately, so. Periodically, so. That sounds good for the policy. So do you like that for the policy, what Ken said, and do you think that we could put forward the policy and then be working on the ARs for the next 6 months?
Yeah, I think we can expedite, not expedite, but just take the policy through the regular.
That's what I'm thinking, and
format,
then
yeah,
even
and
if we
then
just
work-
have reading after reading after reading at legislative meetings, that's fine. So at least it's ready to go when the AR is ready then. Okay, so that's what we'll do, so similar to what we're doing with independent study. We'll do a first reading on policy 130. And then we will be working on the AR after multiple discussions with different stakeholders. Good plan?
So who's going to, okay, between now and next meeting?
Steve's going to. He's got a couple meetings set up with different groups, so.
I already made the
Yeah.
policy changes.
Can we just quickly ask each other for the three paragraphs and guidelines that we said we would move to the AR, do we
Yeah.
like all three of them? I think we should read them carefully and make sure that's what we
Yeah,
want to
okay.
be at. So.
Okay, what do you want to move them on to?
The guidelines.
I think maybe move the,
The
Yes.
guidelines, right?
Yes.
One question about homework.
Yeah.
To the current, is there currently an AR?
No, there's not.
There's no AR. So there has never been anything about how much time anybody at any level should spend on homework. Is there anything in-
They'll be planned with respect to time, it says in policy here, but there's nothing that says, 10 minutes per grade or.
The value to the student is more important than time.
Yes.
There should be an upper limit on.
Right.
like,
So it's interesting, I looked at some of the peer districts that we're comparing ourselves to, and I can actually share that document with everyone here today as well. Some districts put sort of caps, other districts put ranges, some districts have nothing. And I think one of the things that I circled back with the superintendents in each of the peer districts, the 10 districts we're comparing ourselves to, asking them to send my email off to whoever is responsible for instruction in their district. And I'm asking them to clarify if what's written in either their policy and AR or student handbooks are, if that information is the same as what's going on a day-to-day basis. So then I think we can look at that, you know,
Right.
and go from there. I do think some upper cap is really needed, because otherwise we can get into a situation where kids have 4 or 5 hours of homework. Now, sometimes that's a function of taking multiple AP classes,
Yeah.
and that's, you know.
I was just going to say that we were like sort of laughing about it should not interfere with the proper development of the student's health, nor the students' responsibilities in the home. Just like I've definitely had nights where I stayed up so late that I felt sick the next day. But I don't know if it's just part of like upper Dublin culture that everyone does so much and that like challenges themselves with hard courses that there's like, I don't know, how much homework do you guys think you have every night? I said there's definitely nights I've had like 4 or 5 hours of homework. I mean, granted that's with breaks, but no one can sit there for 5 hours straight and do homework. But
I'm thinking about that now. Like I wasn't even gonna come here because I was thinking about how many tests I have tomorrow. So like,
Especially with like after school activities and stuff like that. Sometimes it can get
sometimes when you go to the basketball game, you really want to just focus on your schoolwork.
So I don't know that you have to set like a limit necessarily on how much homework, but maybe just like reinforce more to the teachers, or I don't know how that works, but just the amount of homework we get, or just maybe like if a student emails a teacher saying, I had a lot going on last night, I couldn't get this done, and the teacher like should be understandable of that and know that the teachers, or that the student is coming from like a good place.
And some teachers have like homework passes, so you can maybe like turn in a homework assignment like a day late. If you turn in the pass, but you can only use like 2 passes a quarter.
I feel like there's a certain risk if you don't set a time limit and you do implement all that great stuff about making homework really valuable,
Right.
then there isn't the opportunity anymore for students to say, you know what, this is just busy work.
Yeah.
I'm going to use a homework pass, or I'm going to, not do it, or I'm going to just half-ass it, or whatever.
That's true.
It's all really meaningful.
Oh, really? Yeah. That is true.
I mean, the reality is,
Right, yeah.
not everyone is doing their A work on every single assignment every single day.
Yeah.
You know, that's,
I have another question for you. How many of your assignments are only for that one night, and how many are longer term where part of the process is budgeting your time, like longer term projects?
Depends on class.
Math is usually like every night, the next day. Like history and English, you more have like essays due in a week or projects due in 3 weeks.
Because the amount of time you spend on homework might depend on whether you do a good
Right.
job of budgeting your time over a longer term project.
which it says here is part of the goal to
But,
Mr. DRC, would you say in social studies in high school, it's a 1 day assignment most of the time?
It would be, my long term is like study guides or something like that. They get at the beginning of the lesson, and then, I go over it like the day before the test, and it's something that they get their points for at the very end. But as we're going through, they're able to, see the terms, ask questions about it. I don't get a lot of homework because I was just a student who just didn't really like homework. When I was in school, so I try and limit it. It's more about like, what's that?
I loved your homework schedule.
But a lot of it is about, but you learn, but a lot of it's about reading and studying a certain amount of time each night. And if you do that, you're going to do well in this class. And so I think that was more applicable than just saying you're forced to do this and do that. I think that they got more out of it. So yeah, this is my class before. So thank you. Maybe it's good in front of my bosses. I appreciate it.
Consider this a walkthrough.
Yeah. Okay. But there are teachers, and you say depending on the subject. So how do you set that limit? Does each subject get a certain amount of time per night, or how do you budget? Once you start to set time frames or parameters like that, like how do you budget? Like your 2 hours, like who gets that piece? Is it like test days? Like social studies on Monday, you know, on C&D days can have an hour, and otherwise they can only have 15 or 20 minutes. Like how do you set those parameters?
Well, and do
We're gonna give
teachers
teachers
know
time.
how much
Social studies
time
sits
it
down with math.
takes
Yeah.
to do an assignment?
Yeah.
I think for what I would assign, if I have them something to do, yeah, I'm going to know what it's going to take for them to do something. Or if I'm setting up a project, I know they have a certain amount of class time, and then it should probably take maybe a couple hours over the next like 5 days. So maybe like if they do 15 or 20 minutes a day, they can get it done. It's how do you decide to manage your time. Now, if you wait the night before and you've got other projects, that I think is the key. Is instilling like time management in the students, and then how do you set those blocks for each subject.
Yeah.
I think where the real power is, starting at the middle school, because we're naturally teamed, teachers can be having those conversations. It becomes exponentially more difficult at the high school when kids could have any number or combination of teachers. But I think the point of helping kids get in that pattern or that habit of spacing and planning, I think can really be taken care of at the middle school.
How much of your homework is just reading?
30 minutes.
Yeah, like
Just for like maybe history and English combined.
yeah, like AP Lit, we read books, so that was like a lot of reading every night. But this year, AP Lang, sorry, AP Literature, AP Language, and so it's mostly writing. I don't do that much reading this year.
Actually, in my French class, we're doing a lot of reading right now, so that takes a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean for history, it's just outlines. Like
Lots of
if
outlines.
there's a lot of pages that I have to outline, usually my teacher gives us time in class. I don't know if all teachers do that, but I know my teacher does, and then I would get like a good chunk of it done. So maybe not so much history, but English, yeah. These are quite a bit of reading.
All right, so we'll have our first reading of policy 130 at the legislative meeting. And there's a lot of work to be done, research essentially, before we can even start working on the nitty-gritty part of the I know that I think our administration and most board members have to leave here at 3:30, so I don't think that we'll really be able to get much into the student athletics policy unless you have something that the burning information you want to give us. We are willing here to listen to this.
Yeah, the only thing I saw was in 123.
Yeah.
Was just wording was underneath in
The policy or the
let me go through and find the sort of. I think it's the policy.
Do something that if you can get the SGA together and send Mr. Schultz and I some dates that we could meet over lunch.
Yeah.
We can do lunch again.
Definitely.
I'll spring for it this time. and then we can talk about these policies.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
In the word under club sports, you have districts, weather, financials, WEA should be WHET.
You should join the policy.
There you go.
Yeah.
And my other thing was underneath in guidelines where I thought that you should have when it said they must follow all requirements, and it should be shall. Because you shall in most of your wording, and I think that like why have must there? Must you shall follow, not must. You know there is no choice. You follow. So that should be shall. You follow requirements. That's the only thing I saw in 123.
Naz, could you please call extension 2001? Thank you.
Other than that, all right. Thank you for inviting us. We appreciate it.
You're always welcome to come to policy and give us your input. Right, yeah, and that's what happened last year, is that we started this and then the students actually came to subsequent policy committee meetings, which was great, and so you're more than welcome. And if you have input before a meeting, you can always email us, talk to us about that.
And I think this is great because I think this year we did it in March.
Yes.
Or before we did it in April, so when it came into the second reading for a lot of us, the kids were off in the summer, so if we can do that like the March and May, then for the students that are here, the members of our current steering committee who are present can, have, you know, we're at the first meeting, they know what you're talking about in the second meeting.
Right. Yeah.
So that works out as well.
You're always welcome to come to board meetings.
Daniel does invite, there are point opportunities for General
True.
Assembly members for them to show.
Every month we
support.
announce the.
We do offer it,
That's
so.
great, that's great, yeah.
That's great.
So he always gives a nice little report of what's going on, the high school, which is great. That's here.
No homework. Lesson.
No homework.
Thank you. I like this class.
We can do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, we're adjourned.